So, quick question. Have you ever heard of a place called Venice? No, no, not the one in Italy with the fancy canals. I'm talking about Venice, Florida. Yeah, that's right. There's a Venice right here in Florida. And believe it or not, it's got its own canals too. I know, wild, right? So, today we're diving into this little beach town that's more than just palm trees and sunsets. It's got a backstory that goes way back, like more than 12,000 years back. And honestly, it's one of those places that makes you kind of go, wait, why haven't I been here yet? But I mean, don't feel bad. You're not alone if you didn't know that. Venice isn't always top of mind when people think of Florida. But trust me, after today, you're going to want to plan a trip. We'll be talking about how this town got its name, the quirky way it was planned. Yep, it's a planned city, and some other fun stuff, like why it's known as the shark tooth capital of the world. So grab your coffee, or if you're driving, maybe just turn up the volume a bit, and let's get into the story of Venice, Florida. It's a place that's just as cool as it is surprising.
Welcome to Old Florida Now, where we uncover the rich history and hidden stories of the Sunshine State. Each episode will explore the people, places, and events that shaped Florida's past. Let's dive in.
All right, so let's roll back the clock a bit. Actually, let's roll it way back. Like we're talking more than 12,000 years ago, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? I mean, Florida back then looked totally different. We're talking vast forests, giant animals roaming around, and believe it or not, people were already living in what we now call Venice. And it's kind of wild to imagine, but this whole area was home to indigenous people long before any Europeans showed up. And these early Floridians were basically the original beachgoers, except, they were more into hunting mastodons than lounging on the sand with a margarita. And they weren't just passing through. These folks were thriving here, hunting, gathering, and living off the land. They saw Florida when it was all untouched and wild, which, man, that must have been something. So fast forward a bit to the 1800s, and that's when settlers from up north started making their way down here. They were drawn in by the natural beauty, which, I mean, makes sense, but also by land offers from the government. Yep, that's right. The old come get your free land approach. And it worked. People were packing up and heading to Florida to start fresh, and Venice started to take shape as a result. It's kind of cool to think that while we see Venice as this charming little beach town today, it has roots going back thousands of years. There's a lot more history buried beneath those palm trees than you'd expect. And trust me, we're just getting started. There's a lot more to uncover about how this place went from ancient hunting grounds to the Venice we know today. So here's a fun little twist for you. The town of Venice, was Florida. Yeah, it's actually named after Venice, Italy. I know, right? You wouldn't expect that from a beach town in Florida. But it turns out we have a guy named Frank Heigl to thank for that. Frank was one of the early settlers in the area. And here's the cool part. He actually grew up in Venice, Italy. So you can kind of see where this is going. He spent his childhood in the original Venice, fell in love with those iconic canals. And when he moved to Florida, he thought, hey, why not bring a little piece of Italy with me? And so in 1888, he officially named the town Venice. Now, we don't have the gondolas or ancient architecture, though that would be kind of awesome. But you can still catch a bit of that old world charm here and there, especially with some of the canals that were added later. It's funny, though. I mean, think about it. You're cruising down the Florida coast, probably expecting places with names like Clearwater or Fort Myers, and then boom, Venice. It kind of makes you do a double take, right? But hey, that's the beauty of Florida. You never really know what to expect. You could be thinking palm trees and alligators, and instead you get a little slice of Italy. And honestly, Frank Heigl's vision for the town kind of set the tone for what Venice would become. This mix of laid back Florida vibes with a dash of something a little more, I don't know, sophisticated. So yeah, next time you're in Venice, Florida, just remember it's got a name with a whole lot of history behind it, even if it's an ocean away from its namesake. All right, so this part of Venice's story is pretty interesting. So Venice wasn't just one of those towns that grew randomly with people throwing up buildings wherever they felt like it. Nope. This place was actually planned, like really planned. In the 1920s, this guy named Dr. Fred Albee, yeah, a doctor, had this big vision for Venice. And I know you're probably thinking, wait, a doctor was behind the planning of a whole city? Yeah, it's kind of weird, but he wasn't just any doctor. He was one of those forward-thinking types. He teamed up with this famous city planner, John Nolan, and together they were like, all right, let's make Venice a model city. And they didn't just throw up a few buildings and call it a day. They went all in on the Mediterranean revival style architecture. Those cool terracotta roofs, archways, the whole deal. It was supposed to give the town this European old world feel, but still with a laid-back Florida twist. I know they also made sure to include these wide tree-lined streets, plenty of green spaces, and the canals, of course. You got to have canals if you're going to name your town after Venice, right? It's kind of amazing to think about, though. I mean, here you got this tiny beach town, and they designed it to be this perfect blend of nature and architecture with a real thought-out layout. Not many places in Florida or anywhere really can say they were planned from the ground up like that. And that's why Venice looks the way it does today. And when you walk around town, it's got this kind of flow to it. It feels intentional, like it was made to be enjoyed, not just thrown together as people showed up. So next time you're strolling down those wide streets or admiring the Mediterranean style buildings, just know there's a whole lot of thought behind it. Dr. Albee and John Nolan had a vision. And honestly, they kind of nailed it. Okay, so let's talk about when Venice really started to take off, the boom times. And honestly, it's kind of funny how this all happened because it wasn't just some natural growth. Venice got a serious boost from two very, let's call them unique sources. First up in 1932, the Kentucky Military Institute. Yeah, you heard that right. A military school from Kentucky decided to make Venice its winter headquarters. I guess even cadets needed a break from the cold, right? So they set up shop down here, and it was a pretty big deal. I mean, you've got all these young men, their families, staff. Suddenly, Venice is buzzing with all this new activity. It brought a lot of money and, honestly, a bit of prestige to the area. But wait, it gets even better. Because then, in 1960, the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, rolls into town. Yep, the greatest show on earth made Venice its winter headquarters too. So now, on top of cadets marching around, you've got elephants, trapeze artists, clowns, the whole circus vibe happening. Imagine living in Venice back then. One minute you're seeing cadets in uniform, and the next there's an elephant walking down the street. It must have been wild, but here's the thing. Both of these groups really shaped Venice's culture and economy. The circus brought in tourists, performers, and this whole creative energy that made Venice feel like more than just a sleepy beach town. It's a vibe that stuck around even after the circus moved out in the 90s. You can still see the impact today. Venice has this quirky, artsy feel that's kind of rooted in that circus history. And honestly, it's a big reason why Venice stands out compared to other Florida towns. So between the military school and the circus, Venice went through a total transformation in the mid 20th century. It wasn't just about sunshine and beaches anymore. It had this whole cultural layer that added to the charm. And if you're curious to dig deeper into how these two things shaped Venice, there's some cool reading out there. The circus especially has a fascinating history tied to Florida. You might want to check out some old archives or articles on the Ringling family and their influence in the state. It's pretty wild stuff. I think I might do an episode on that a little bit later. All right, so we've talked about the history, the planning, the circus, but now it's time for the fun stuff. Some cool random facts about Venice that'll probably surprise you. First up, Venice has this nickname that sounds kind of wild at first, the shark tooth capital of the world. Yeah, I know that's not exactly something you put on a postcard, right? But it's true. The beaches around here, especially Casperson Beach, are famous for fossilized shark teeth washing up on shore. People come from all over just to sift through the sand and find these teeth. And we're not talking about tiny little teeth either. Some of these are pretty huge from ancient sharks that used to cruise around the area. So next time you're on a Venice beach, don't just focus on getting that perfect tan. Keep an eye out for those shark teeth. It's like a treasure hunt, but, with prehistoric souvenirs. And here's another fun fact. Venice is home to 12 buildings that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We've got the Venice Train Depot, Hotel Venice, the Triangle Inn, all these spots that have been preserved because of their historical significance. So if you're into history or architecture, there's a lot to explore beyond the beaches, And speaking of things to explore, Venice also hosts the largest community theater per capita in the U.S. The Venice Theater, how cool is that? A town this size having such a vibrant arts scene. The theater was founded in 1950 and has grown into this huge cultural hub. They put on all kinds of shows year round. So if you're in town, check out what's playing. You might catch something amazing. Oh, and here's a little trivia for the dog lovers out there. Venice has one beach, Brohard Paw Park, that's specifically for dogs. So if you've got a four-legged friend who likes to hit the beach, this is the spot. You don't see that everywhere in Florida, which is pretty awesome. Venice is definitely more than just a pretty beach town. From shark teeth to historic buildings and even dog-friendly beaches, it's got something for everyone. So, yeah. Venice may not be the biggest city, but it's definitely packed with unique little quirks that make it stand out in its own way. So here's a name you might not expect to pop up in a story about Venice, Florida, Bertha Palmer. And if you're thinking, wait, who's Bertha Palmer? Don't worry, you're not alone. Bertha was this super influential Chicago socialite back in the early 1900s. And for reasons that still kind of surprise people, she decided to make a major move down to Florida. She bought up 140,000 acres of land, which is just a crazy amount of land, right? And a big chunk of that included what would eventually become Venice. And get this, she didn't just sit on that land. No, Bertha Palmer was one of those people who always had big ideas. She turned it into this massive cattle ranch and even did some agricultural experiments. Like, she was out here trying to figure out the best ways to grow crops in Florida's climate. You got to hand it to her. She wasn't just a city socialite sipping tea in fancy clothes. She got her hands dirty, literally, and really started to shape the land. A lot of the early development in this area, that's all thanks to Bertha. And it wasn't just about the land either. Bertha had this vision for Venice being more than just some little rural town. Her influence brought a certain, sophistication to the area. People started to see Venice as a place with real potential for development, and it kind of paved the way for everything that came next. I guess you could say she was a bit of a pioneer in her own right, but, with a fancier wardrobe. So, when you think of Venice, Florida, don't forget about Bertha Palmer. She's a big reason why this place is more than just another beach town. All right, so Venice has this cool bit of history that not everyone knows about. It's got a military past. Yep, believe it or not, during World War II, Venice was home to the Venice Army Air Base. Kind of hard to picture now with all the beaches and palm trees, but back then, this place played a big role in training military pilots. Imagine it. You're walking through downtown Venice today, and it's all quaint and peaceful, but just over 70 years ago, you would have seen planes buzzing overhead and young pilots in training. It was a pretty serious operation. So the base trained pilots for combat, and when the war ended, the military presence didn't just pack up and disappear. The impact of that base stuck around, especially on the economy. The base provided jobs, brought people to the area, and even laid the groundwork for some of the development that came later. In fact, part of what was the air base is now the Venice Municipal Airport. So, the airport you might fly into today has some deep roots in the area's history. It's one of those things where you wouldn't really know unless someone pointed it out. I love finding out about stuff like that. Where something ordinary, like an airport, has this whole backstory tied to world events, kind of makes you see it in a new light, right? So, while Venice might be all about beach vibes and small town charm today, it's got this layer of military history that's pretty fascinating when you dig into it. Just another reason why Venice is more than meets the eye. All right, we covered a lot about Venice's history, but I got to share some fun little tidbits with you, the kind of random facts that'll make you go, huh, I didn't know that. First up, did you know Venice was named one of the top 10 happiest seaside towns in America by Coastal Living? Yeah, back in 2015. And honestly, if you've been there, it kind of makes sense. I mean, beaches, laid back vibes, and that small town feel. What's not to love? But wait, there's more. Venice is also designated as a Tree City USA, and it's held that title for over 30 years, which basically means they take their trees seriously. You'll see tons of green spaces and beautiful tree-lined streets when you visit. It gives the town that extra, I don't know, welcoming feel. Like nature's just a part of the everyday life there. Oh, and here's a good one. They have this annual event called the Shark's Tooth Festival. Yep, it's exactly what it sounds like. People from all over the state come down to celebrate Venice's status as the shark tooth capital of the world. They've got vendors, music, food, and of course, tons of fossilized shark teeth. It's kind of quirky, but in the best way possible. Venice really leans into its unique vibe. It's not trying to be some big, flashy tourist spot. Instead, it's got this cool mix of history, nature, and just happiness. And yeah, maybe a few shark teeth thrown in there for good measure. So next time you're in Venice, keep an eye out for those trees, those smiles, and if you're lucky, maybe even a shark tooth or two. All right, let's talk about something that just feels good. Venice being named one of the top 10 happiest seaside towns in America by Coastal Living back in 2015. I mean, that's pretty high praise, right? And honestly, if you've ever been to Venice, you can totally see why. There's just something about this place that makes you kind of breathe easier. Like you step into town and suddenly everything's a little slower, a little more peaceful. It's one of those places where you can feel your stress just melting away. The beaches are gorgeous, obviously, but it's more than that. It's the whole vibe of the town, the tree-lined streets, the small shops, the locals who all seem like they've got a permanent smile on their face. There's this really strong sense of community, and I think that's what makes it feel so welcoming. And the weather, oh man, the weather doesn't hurt either. Sunshine pretty much year round. I mean, come on, no wonder people are happy. It's one of those places where you walk around and just feel good, whether you're grabbing coffee at a little cafe or catching a sunset at the beach. It's like the whole town is in on the secret to a good life. No wonder it made that happiest seaside towns list. So yeah, Venice might not be the biggest or most famous place in Florida, but it's got something special. And if you ever get the chance to visit, you'll get what I mean. It's just a happy place. And who wouldn't want to be part of that? All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Old Florida Now. I hope you enjoyed our little trip through Venice, Florida. It's honestly one of those places that's packed with way more history and character than you'd ever expect, right? I mean, from ancient indigenous communities to circus performers to shark teeth collectors, Venice really has it all. So if you haven't been, maybe it's time to add it to your Florida bucket list. And hey, if you like today's episode, or if you've got any fun stories about Venice or other spots in Florida you think we should cover, drop us a line. You can find me, Bo Carter, over on Old Florida Now on Instagram. We're always looking for new ideas, new places to explore. And honestly, just hearing from you guys makes this even more fun. So until next time, take it easy. Keep enjoying those Florida vibes. And I'll catch you on the next episode of Old Florida Now.
Thanks for listening to Old Florida Now. Stay tuned for more stories from the Sunshine State's past. Until next time.